You do.
I think there's probably you do, right? How much
you should. You should. I mean, if people should check their. This is again smart TVs. If you've got one that's of a recent vintage, check and you'll see there's a little hole along the frame. That's the camera, and there's a microphone set up, an audio system. Yeah, just put a piece of tape over. That's your your low cost solution, right? You can go in there and adjust and turn it off, but you try figuring that out, right? That's like trying to program your VCR, right? Trying to figure out how to get into your TV, into the settings to change the smart interactivity, and then do you also want to trust that that's what's going to happen if you turn it off? So just put a piece of duct tape over it.
They've showed that with Facebook, that even if you turn off location, they're still tracking you.
Yeah. That's why I say, again, going back to that same old thing, which is like, the government's trying to screw us over, they're spying on us. You know what? Unless you're involved in criminal activity or terrorism, they honestly don't have any interest, but they also don't have the resources and the time available. Commercial side of things, though, is different because it drives what they're all about, which is making money.
Especially when you sign those terms of agreements, the terms of use agreements. Like most people just accept it. You don't look through it.
Right. Well, there's a regulation. There's a piece of legislation or whatever that outlaws, secretly videoing. I forget what it was. It was years and years ago. It was decades ago. But you give up that right by clicking on agree on those user agreements.
Yeah.
But I don't know anybody who's ever read a user agreement.
What is this, Jamie?
New law passed in California this year.
Consumer Privacy Act allows anyone who resides in a state to access and obtain copies of the data that companies store on them and the right to delete that data and opt out of companies selling or monetizing their data.
California leading the way again.
It's only for residents in California, though.
If
you live somewhere else, you can check, but you can't have
them. I'm moving from Idaho to California. Just
there's
for
some
this.
good spots in California. This isn't one of them.
Yeah.
It's a good spot. Just too many people found out about it. My worry is more of social media companies now than anything. Even in a lot of ways more than the government spying on us. I worry about the power that something like Facebook has, the insane amount of influence that they have on people, and how through the use of their algorithms they actually instigate arguments and try to get people, because that's how people respond, and that's what makes people want to click on things, and that's what generates revenue. So their algorithms encourage, and it's the idea is that they encourage outrage, but they don't really. But people like outrage, so they encourage you to go seek out. Like Ari Shaffir did an experiment where he used YouTube and he only searched for puppies. That's all he searched for, just puppies on YouTube, and that's all YouTube would recognize. So all they were recommending to him was puppies. And he's like, oh, okay. So it's really not nefarious. It's based entirely on what your needs are or what your interests are. But so many people are interested in things that outrage them that it becomes a very profitable thing for them when their algorithm shows these people what they want. But the problem is the people itself. It's not necessarily the algorithm. It's not like the algorithm is some nefarious algorithm is designed to instigate strife.
No, it's taking advantage of human nature to some degree, but it's also, you've raised a really important point, because coming up on this election, people are talking about, oh my God, they're going to hack in, they're going to influence the vote. Now, part of the danger is in the social engineering, right? And the way, and it's very clever. So, if you look at like something that just happened, this actually is really interesting, and it's still being investigated. But a report came out from a group, Area 1, which is sort of looking at hackers and looking at cybersecurity issues, and it's not a particularly well-known group. It's not like Kaspersky or some of these others that are out there. But they just came out with a report a couple days ago, basically saying that the Russians, a Russian entity, likely the former GRU, the military intelligence group of the Russian intelligence service, hacked into Burisma. Now, Burisma is that company in the Ukraine that Hunter Biden was sat on the board of, right? And now you think, oh, Russians hacked into it. And so what happens? Almost immediately when this report comes out saying a Russian intel operation hacked into Burisma recently, as it was sort of becoming an issue, and Trump was banging on about it, and Hunter Biden, and there was talk about holding up Ukrainian aid if you don't investigate the Biden situation. So you'd look at this, and if you just looked at it on a very simple level, you go, wow. And I've already seen some of that narrative saying, well, look, the Russians are working on behalf of Trump again. See? That's what they're doing. They're working on behalf of Trump. They're hacking into Burisma, and that's what he was complaining about. If you step back and you think about what are the Russians trying to do, right, with all of their hacking efforts, all their social media engineering, they're trying to create dissent. So now what have you got? Now you're ramping up this story again. Now, to what degree Area 1's story or report is correct? I mean, there's some discussion as to whether it's accurate or not. But to that degree that you have to look at everything now with a very skeptical eye, and you have to say, okay, what is the purpose of it? Why is this a timed leak of information? Right? Did they intend to? In other words, did the Russian intel service? They don't do anything haphazardly, right? Did they do this with the idea that we're going to leak this out now? Because now it looks like we're still, we're pushing this whole thing. We're trying to help Trump. We're going to get that narrative going again, right? Because now we're getting into an election cycle. It's interesting stuff. It's like after Soleimani was smoked, almost immediately after, social media posts, sort of very subtly, but pro-Iranian regime, Soleimani, again, very subtle, but in that vein, they spiked. Over the course of the next 48 hours, massive numbers compared to what had been in the past of sympathetic, enough to turn people's thoughts, right, to get that narrative going of like, well, oh my God, they assassinated a foreign leader, right? That's all they're looking to do is create that. And the Iranian cybersecurity force is increasingly sophisticated. 10 years ago, they probably wouldn't have been able to orchestrate that sort of social media work. I guess my point being is that we look at things very simplistically, right? Because we tend to look at it through this political spectrum, saying I'm right, I'm left, whatever. But you have to step back and think, what are they doing? What's the purpose of this? And maybe it's more complex or layered than just simply accepting what it is that's being said, which happens. That's the danger of social media. Is everyone takes at face value shit that they see on Twitter or whatever, and rather than stepping back and going, I wonder if this story is even accurate. But somebody will post some bullshit. Half the time, it's whether it's for the left or right doesn't matter, or whether it's from a foreign entity, the state-sponsored effort. You take it and you run with it. Next thing you know, it's got 10,000 likes and people are talking about it like it's correct.
Yeah, that's a real problem with today's social media, is that these agencies like the Internet Research Agency in Russia did before the 2016 election, they really can stir up dissent with these thousands and thousands of social media accounts that they have, and they can get people thinking in a certain way. They can get people to argue things in a certain way, and you hear those talking points that these bots and these companies that are designed just to stir people up. You see those talking points repeated, so it is effective.
Oh no, absolutely. And look, the Russians have been doing this. Years and years ago, decades ago, they were buying off journalists to write favorable articles or articles that they wanted to get the narrative out there for, right? So they would pay off journalists, whether it was overseas or here, wherever it may be, and that was old school, right? But the point of it, right, the reasoning behind it is still the same, right? You're trying to affect the narrative. You're trying to affect a certain opinion. Or you're trying to foment dissent. You're trying to create some chaos. And you're right. Here, now with a lot of the social media that foreign entities are doing, they're trying to take advantage and trying to drive wedges in. So you get these things that try to drive and create more of a racial divide, as an example. Whatever it is that they can do. And sometimes they're doing it just simply to create the chaos. Sometimes they're doing it for a more specific, focused reason. But we're not sophisticated. I mean, I think we're more aware of it now because it's been in the news and we've been talking about it to some degree. But as a population, we're not very sophisticated, and so they're still going to take advantage of it. And it's not just the Russians; it's any nation that's got the resource or the ability and somewhat motivation and sees it in their own best interest. They're going to be engaged in this. They'll have a cyber unit that's doing this sort of thing. So. I don't know where it's going to go, but you worry about sort of the impact that it has. It's not the it's not the idea that they're going in there to voting machines and switching up data. I mean, frankly, we should be going to a paper-based system. I would, if I was in charge, I would say that's it. No more paperless voting systems. Get that shit out of here. We're not going to rely on the internet. You know what they're doing in Iowa for the caucuses? It's all going to be internet-based voting reporting.
Really?
For the caucuses in Iowa, right?
Interesting.
You think, I mean, but again, you think that whether it's independent hackers or state-sponsored from China or Russia, wherever. Of course, they're targeting this, and they're putting a great deal of resource into it, and they've already probably mapped out the infrastructure. So, hey, get back to the old days. If you're targeting a terrorist organization, and you start having success picking up comms, communications, and gathering signals intelligence on them, first thing they do is throw their phones away and go back to the old system of, look, I'm going to handwrite some message. I'm going to hand it to my cousin. He's going to hand it to his cousin, and that's all. That's our communication system from now on. So we should dumb down and go back to the old days and just do a paper system, which takes longer and is a pain in the ass, but
you can't hack it.
Can't hack it. Yeah. Anyway, that's just me.